Hey teacher friends, Anton here, and welcome to this episode of the Teacher Support Network podcast. Today, we have an important episode pertaining to supporting our students with disabilities in the IEP meeting. But first, let me ask you a question and see if you've seen yourself in one or more of these situations. So have you ever ran or been to an IEP meeting where it seems like no one was on the same page? If you're a gen ed teacher, have you ever felt overwhelmed in a meeting or just unsure of your role at the IEP meeting? If you're a SPED teacher running the IEP meeting, have you ever felt frustrated because no one gave you input about the student before the meeting or didn't even show up to the meeting at all? Or have you ever sensed parents or other specialists at the meeting leaving the meeting kind of upset or just were really quiet because they felt maybe unheard and so forth? Can you relate in any way? Well, the goal of the IEP meeting is to better support students with disabilities in the school environment. But the lack of effective collaboration does not move that IEP team towards that goal. I know IEP meetings can be and feel overwhelming. I can't tell you the number of meetings that I've either run, been a part of, or helped support other teachers within their own IEP meetings. So I know the extent of how IEP meetings can feel really overwhelming. But did you know that students with disabilities are more likely to succeed when their IEP plans and the individual education plans are developed through strong collaboration among the gen ed and SPED teachers, parents, specialists, and the other key members of the IEP team? So in today's episode, we're going to cover why teamwork is essential in IEP meetings, what challenges kind of get in the way of that, and then really look at some practical ways to improve collaboration in IEP meetings. So first, let's look at why collaboration in IEP meetings matter. I'm going to look at really kind of two reasons. There's many, but I'm going to just kind of look at two reasons. So first, let's just think about it like this. IEP meetings aren't just about the compliance with the law. Yes, we have to have IEP meetings. Yes, the law is attached to it. But IEP meetings are really about creating realistic, workable plans for student success. Those students with disabilities who need support in the classroom and in the gen ed environment. And so really, it's more than just a compliance with it. It's about a plan that kind of works. And so first, collaboration really matters because it helps bring a more holistic view of the student to the IEP meeting, because each member brings their own unique insights. So if you're a gen ed teacher, you can give insights about the classroom context, curriculum, standards, expectations, and many times you have data on how a student might be performing in your class related to grade level standards. Also, in terms of like social or behavioral information, you can give a lot of input in that sense. If you're a SPED teacher, you may also be their case manager, so you have expertise on the IEP process, specific disabilities, accommodations, and just really individualized supports that can be really helpful in the gen ed classroom. Parents have in-depth understanding of their own child's strengths, their needs, and just experiences outside of the school, which can really inform how they may be performing in school. Then you have specialists like the speech and language pathologist, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, autism consultants, counselors, etc. These specialists bring a certain level of expertise and solutions based on their training. So they're really important in those meetings when they are invited. You have the admin who really understands the school and the district context, the available resources that are part of the school, and placement options, etc. So right there you have a wealth of people bringing much experience and knowledge to the table on behalf of the student. And then I feel like one of the most least used but most important part of the team is the student themselves, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later in this episode. So not only does collaboration matter in IEP meetings because it brings this holistic view of the student to the meeting, but secondly, it matters because it brings better outcomes for the student. When you have a cohesive, well-aligned team, it helps create plans that are realistic and actionable for the student. And then it also creates and fosters greater trust between the teachers and the educators and the families, and gives like more accountability to executing the individualized education plan for the student in a way where everybody's on board. So those are two reasons why collaboration matters. Now, let's look a little bit about some of the common barriers to collaboration in terms of specifically with the IEP meeting. So one, we got to hit a big one, time constraints. Teachers often have limited time to prepare for the meetings or even attend meetings just due to the context of having a lot to do at school based off other responsibilities and duties that they're responsible for. So time is always a big constraint. Sometimes, number two, you also have communication gaps. Like misunderstandings can occur when like team members really don't align or understand the IEP process. And then sometimes even just like I call it like the educational jargon that comes with discussing parts of the IEP or the process can be real confusing, especially like if you're a parent and you're not really, don't really understand a lot of the terms. So sometimes that could be a communication gap that makes people feel like they're not heard or it's just a lack of understanding. And then the third kind of barrier to collaborating in an IEP meeting is sometimes just conflicts or different perspectives. I mean, you can have disagreements between team members, especially when discussing annual goals, accommodations, other types of related services, just in general based off of where people are coming from. So these three things are common barriers to collaboration in meetings specifically. And these are real challenges to collaborative IEP meetings. So what are some actionable strategies you can use to have a more collaborative IEP meeting? So I want to examine some strategies and ideas before, during, and after the IEP meeting. So think about these as I go through them and see where you may be using some of these. And you can also think about where you might be able to use some of them or start adding these to your teaching practice as it relates to the IEP meeting to make it more collaborative. So let's talk about before the meeting. So one big strategy is really just having like pre-meeting communication. And that could vary from, there's so many different ways you can do that. I mean, gen ed teachers and sped teachers can have quick check-ins, like whether through email or just 5 to 10 minute chats beforehand about the student's progress and any big concerns that might be on the agenda, so that you don't go into the meeting with surprises. One suggestion I used to use a lot, it was really helpful, is to, if I'm as a sped teacher, so I'm talking from a sped teacher's point of view right now, is to get gen ed teachers input on the students' academic, social, and behavior performances in their classes before the meeting. And I used to use a teacher input form, which I shared electronically or a hard copy, and it would be returned to me. So you can take this form and share it with your gen ed teachers if you're a sped teacher, and they can give it back to you. And in the meeting, they can expound upon it. Gen ed teachers can expound upon it. But a lot of times this has information about what are the students' strengths, how they're doing academically, socially, behaviorally, and it just gave some information to come into the meeting prepared, but also it started the conversation. So if I needed to talk to a teacher beforehand, I could do that. Specialists like SLPs, OTs, PTs, autism consultants, counselors, like we talked about before, you can share updates ahead of time, either in person or through some form of communication, like, email, Google Docs, or sometimes if you're like a related service provider, you might have access to the IEP system or platform that is used for the meetings, but when they do where the paperwork is, the actual plan is. And so you can put your information in before the meeting as well. You can communicate with parents before the meeting while when you're scheduling it. And if you don't schedule it, you can send home a short survey similar to the teacher input one that I discussed above. So the rest of the school-based IEP team can be aware of any kind of concerns that a parent may have before the meeting. And of course, when you go into the meeting, a parent may bring other concerns or greater depth to the concerns they expressed before and explain it in the meeting. But at least beforehand, you have some idea about where the parent concerns may be, so you can, kind of be thinking about it and also preparing for them if there's some easy solutions or some solutions that may be needed. And then finally, this is something I love to do, and I think whether you're in elementary, middle, or high school, I think you can do some form of it. But to do an interest survey with the student themselves beforehand and find out their interests, their strengths, what works for them and what doesn't work for them at school. Too often we talk about students, but never ask them for their opinions. And they often never offer it because we never ask. And of course, it has to be age and developmentally appropriate, so it may not work for all students. But students many times know what they need. And older students, like when I worked with middle and high school students, they can give the rest of the team great insights on how to best support them in the school environment because they know what they need many times. And sometimes we just have to just wait and listen and honestly just ask. So those are some things and ideas and some strategies you might use before the IEP meeting to collaborate together. Now let's talk about during the meeting. So during the meeting, some ways to kind of collaborate and really kind of set a tone. The first thing is to really set a tone. First, start by talking about students' strengths and their successes. And that can be shared by multiple members of the team, from the gen ed teacher to the sped teacher to the related service providers to the parent themselves, and just even using the information that the student gave you about what they thought their strengths was. And it really helps build trust and engagement with the team as you're talking about the student and coming up with a plan for the student. And remember, going back to the inclusion mindsets we talked about, this really starts off the meeting with a strength-based versus the deficit-based way to support the student. Because many times in meetings, we talk about areas of need, but starting off with what the student is doing well can really help set a positive tone and just ways of solutions for the student moving forward. Another idea, strategy to think about really is really to have clear, relatable language so all members of the team, especially parents, understand what's going on and how this plan, like the accommodations, for instance, and the goals, annual goals, how it will look like in the classroom for their child. A lot of times we use like this educational jargon, and it's a lot of words that parents don't understand sometimes. And so they feel disconnected from the meeting. But if we can make it really plain as best as possible, then they feel like they understand what's really happening with their child at school. And then another strategy, another thing, idea is to encourage active participation for all team members, so all voices are feel valued and heard. And that kind of goes into this last one during the meeting, which is collaborative decision making. So together, as you're actively participating, you're brainstorming solutions together based on the student's needs. And with that, you're making sure all members feel heard and valued. And so let's say now you've had before the meeting, you've had the meeting. Now let's look about how collaboration can continue after the meeting. So first, one idea in strategy is to follow up with the next steps that develop from the meeting itself, especially as it relates to your specific role. So for instance, if I was a SPED teacher, a SPED teacher can make sure that the accommodations that were updated in the IEP at the IEP meeting are shared after the meeting with important members of the team once the IEP is finalized. Because a lot of times you might have a student who has an IEP and you got the accommodations at the beginning of the year, and then you have a meeting in the middle of the year and things will change, but people don't have access to the updated information. So as a SPED teacher, like sharing those updated accommodations and any new developments are really important, especially if a student has had an IEP for many years. And some accommodations may stay the same, but other times there are some changes and you need to know that so you can implement them so they can be implemented in a Gen Ed class. Gen Ed teachers, you may need to follow up with parents about any concerns that they came with from the meeting itself related to the classroom, etc. So this is the follow-up. It's important to keep to follow through with the next steps after the meeting, and then keep the next strategy is keep communication open. It's a team effort. The IEP meeting is not just a one-time meeting or event once a year. Yes, we have it because it's an annual review, for instance, but see it as a working document. So one, have regular check-ins between Gen Ed and SPED teachers, regular check-ins with parents, related service providers, and all those things that should be occurring to monitor the progress of the student throughout the year. It just doesn't happen at the IEP meeting. And then also remember, the IEP can be amended if needed as the needs of students change or issues come up that require an additional IEP meeting with the full team. You don't always need an amended IEP, but sometimes it's necessary, and you don't have to wait till a whole full year for the next annual review. So just keep communication open after the meeting and throughout the school year. So I want to end with a personal story that really helped me see the value of collaboration with all members of the team, and especially including a student as a member of the team. Because a lot of times, I talked about this earlier, that we don't always include them, and they don't always have to be at meetings, and sometimes it's not appropriate for them to be at the meetings, especially if they're younger and just their understanding of their IEP and things like that. But I want to tell you this story because it really helped me to see the value of collaboration with a team and working with a student as well. So I was in high school teaching, and I had a student, I think he's a 10th grader, and I always invite my students to the meetings. They don't always come, but I invite them, and I at least do an interest survey with them beforehand so I can bring some of their voice to the meeting and put in an IEP. So this student was there, his parent was there, we had an administrator there, we had a few teachers. The one that I do remember was, because the situation revolves around this particular classroom, and it was an English language art teacher, right? And so we're talking, and we're going through the accommodations and talking about the accommodations. And one of the accommodations, so this student had, he was other health impairment and had ADHD and anxiety. And so we were talking about accommodations as a team, and preferential seating came up, right? And so we were talking about it. The ELA teacher was like, "Yeah, he's sitting in the front of the classroom so he can focus, right? That's where his seating is in terms for this accommodation." And I don't know what made me think of this. I don't know if the student made a face, or I got prompted to say this. But I looked at the student and I said, "Does that work for you in the classroom?" And the student said, "Well, honestly, Mr. McCoy, no." And so, kind of was like, everybody kind of was caught back a little bit. And like, and I said, "Well, so what does preferential seating look like to you? What would help you the best focus in class if you had the choice to choose where you needed to sit?" And so, sometimes you think students going to say, "Oh, by my friends," or things like that. And like, of course, you got to be like, "Well, that's really not helping you." But he said, "No, Mr. McCoy, in her class, I like to sit in the back to the right." And the whole team was like, "To the back to the right? What do you mean by that?" So I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I was like, "Can you explain that to me?" And so the student basically said, "When I'm in the front of the class, because I have anxiety and because I get easily distracted, I'm always wondering what's happening behind me." He said, "But when I sit in the back of the room to the right and the door was to the left in the back," he said, "I can see who's coming in the room and I can see what's happening in front. And so I have less anxiety about what's happening behind me and I'm less distracted. And so that helps me focus more in the class." And I was like, "Oh, wow." I think the whole team was kind of floored, like, "Oh my gosh, like this, we never thought about that." But just by asking him that question, he was able to advocate for himself and say what preferential seating looked like for him. And so the teacher was like, well, I definitely can change your seat and put you in the back and in that way. And so that was, and so that's what the change was at the IEP. But that happened because we included the student in the collaboration process. So like I said, we were already collaborating, but sometimes just asking students can really be helpful. And, you know, that's a situation that I think hopefully it made his learning experience in that particular class as a 10th grader a lot better. And so that's just a little story I wanted to share. I have many stories, but like that one really came to my mind, and it really changed how I started asking more questions to students and asking more questions to team members to really see how those things would look like in a class on behalf of the student. So anyway, so in conclusion, you know, like I said, collaboration between the IEP team before, during, and after IEP meetings really leads to better student outcomes. And small actions like pre-meeting check-ins, teacher, parent, student input surveys, and just getting input from them, and just post-meeting follow-ups can really have a huge impact on the academic, social success of students with disabilities. So which of these strategies or ideas that we talked about, that are talked about in this episode, resonated with you today? I want you to really think about that. Any of these ideas really resonated with you, or strategies? And then for the next IEP meeting that you have, that you either running maybe as a SPED teacher, or one that you attend as a gen ed teacher or a related service provider or specialist, etc. For the next meeting that you run or attend, try one of these strategies that we discussed today. And then notice the difference it makes. Then come back and just share your experience with me in the comments section at the bottom of the show notes page for this episode. I really love to hear how it works for you and what really resonated with you in terms of collaborating better and more effectively at IEP meetings with your colleagues and with parents. And also follow me on my Teacher Support Network Facebook or Instagram page, which also can be found on the show notes page. And so we can connect further and in different spots outside of the podcast here. And I just hope that you have more meaningful and more effective collaboration IEP meetings on behalf of your students with disabilities, because I really think it's going to help them grow and make faster progress. So that's it for today's episode. If you found this episode helpful, or you know anyone who could benefit from the message, please share with a fellow educator. And as always, until next time, I'll see you next week. Be blessed.